This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 57. Jeff Sauer. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 57 of Experts on the Wire. I was introduced to my guest today by a mutual friend who said, you got to have Jeff on your show. He can teach your listeners all about analytics. He's amazing. And I said, analytics, that's okay. As content marketers or SEOs, we're not always excited about analytics. It can sometimes seem a little dry or boring, to be honest. But then I was researching more and more about my guest, and I kept finding these incredible, amazing reports and solutions to problems that us as content marketers, we face all of the time. Let me give you a specific example. So I have a client that has sort of a food product, right? So their blog, they're posting about recipes, or they're posting about fitness, or they're posting about lifestyle and all these categories, right? But the blog URL is on the root domain. I know this is getting technical, but there's no way in analytics to automatically know, okay, does the recipe content perform better than the fitness content that performs better than the nutrition content? It's a real headache to measure this. And sometimes we want to look at content grouped in such a way to tell what content's performing better than others. Or sometimes we want to look at content grouped by author even, or by long posts versus short posts. This is one example of many solutions that Jeff has to a lot of the headaches we all experience with trying to measure content and SEO in analytics. Those analytics tips and tricks start at the 27-minute mark. So if you want to get right to the actionable stuff, go to the 27-minute mark of the show. If not, sit back and relax, or continue jogging or driving in your car, whatever you're doing, and enjoy this episode, number 57 of Experts in the Wire with Jeff Sauer. Jeff, I'm very excited to have you on the wire with us today because I was researching for this show in the last few days, and I just kept finding more and more great stuff that you've published and spoken about and you're teaching. So I can't wait to jump into all of this. But first, I want to go back to your beginnings and just kind of take listeners up to where you are today. So a couple quick questions here. What was the first website you created in 8th grade? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was I used Netscape Navigator, which doesn't exist, and you could just take any website and you could just hit edit, and then you could have a full HTML editor, like a visual editor. And I used that. I took my dad's company website and then I just edited it and I turned it into an homage to the game Heroes of Might and Magic 2, which is a turn-based strategy game that I played a lot on my PC. And I would actually go into that game and take screenshots of all the different characters, like the heroes and stuff like that. And I made like a wiki or a guide to that game. Oh, wow. And it ended up getting people from all over the world to email me and ask me, or either correct things that I was doing incorrectly or ask me questions about that game. And so it was basically the time that I realized that the internet's pretty amazing. So all because I was obsessed with the video game.
This wasn't like a school project. Like, this was a legit website. You published it. It was online and you were getting traffic?
Oh, yeah. It was on my dad's website, his company website. And then I just had a subfolder just called just like a subdirectory. And on that subdirectory, that was getting more traffic than my dad's company website. And I joined these things called web rings, which I didn't know what those were at the time, but you just put like a little code and then it's like next site, last site. And that was how people found this little strategy guide that I had to this video game that I was playing.
I remember web rings in the days of trying to discover Dave Matthews Band music. I was just one site after another trying to get those bootlegs. So then fast forward a little bit to college. You ended up going to college for computer information systems. So why did you choose that technical route versus maybe more of a marketing or analytics route at that time?
Yeah, my dad is one of those article clippers, and this is back when the newspaper was there, but he had read an article that the job of the future was involving computer science. And he showed it to me, and basically it was about how in the Twin Cities, where I'm from, is in the major paper there, that these jobs are in demand. And it was probably like 1997, 98, before the bubble had burst, basically saying that if you get a computer science degree, they're going to pluck you away even before you finish it and get you a job doing, whatever in computers, programming or the web, whatever it ended up being. And so it came down, that article was about 2 different schools, and I chose one of the 2 schools, and that's where I ended up going to college. And it was really just because, I didn't really think about the decision that much. I just happened to be really good with computers and fixing fixing my family's computers. I was always the tech support guy, and it just seemed like the natural thing to go into. It's like, this is the future.
I hear you. I remember, and this is way back in my memory, but I remember like literally buying like a modem or a sound card in 7th grade and like ripping apart my dad's work computer and like installing the thing physically. And I think those experiences are interesting. So I want to read real quick a few of your skills listed in LinkedIn, just to give the listeners a sense of how broad and like vast your experience is. So you have everything from e-commerce to web dev to organic SEO, PPC, Google Website Optimizer, Adobe Creative Suite, HTML, ASP, CSS, SQL, PHP, LAMP. Like, there's so many things in here. So, and I'm skipping around just looking at your profile.
Yeah.
So you went to school for computer information systems, and then, like I was saying here, you went on and you've done so many things in your career as a marketer. Now I want to bring things up a little bit to, you were really kind of talking about at the time the benefit of being on Google Plus. This was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I'm curious because I still see you posting to Google Plus now, and I'm curious if that's just sort of a habit that's left over. Are you still seeing anything happening on Google Plus?
Yeah, that's a good arc, right? Like the all this build up, all these things I did up until playing around on Google Plus. And so how I feel about Google Plus now versus how I did a few years ago, it's definitely lightened like my attitude. So I don't want to go into this thinking that I believe that it's the wave of the future. Actually, that's funny because Google Wave, before that, I think I wrote an article saying, is Google Wave the wave of the future? Google Plus to me was just this, I had this romantic notion that if you were to give Google a strong signal about what you were doing, that they wanted to know all the social signals they can, they were harvesting them. And if you gave them a strong peer signal and became an authority in this network, that you were just basically giving them a green light to take all your stuff and consume it. And you were giving them the strongest signal. And this is really around, Twitter, Facebook. They're popular, they're growing. Google's getting a bunch of crap for not being even, for being behind and for being, losing out on things, and just a lot of, comments about Google's dying because they're not a social network. And so I was like, well, if they're putting this out there, why don't I just give them the strongest signal you possibly can? And since there wasn't a lot of leadership or thought leadership out there and everything, I was like, I'll experiment with this. I'll see what it's like to become an authority here. I'll see if I can grow things and see how it really affects anything from traffic to my own website to search rankings. Authorship was a big thing. I really did believe that this was, and I saw a lot of benefits from it too. But I believe that it was basically the future of how we were going to go through things with Google. And then obviously anybody who's listening probably knows the changes that they made once they got rid of their head of product, and then they started to decouple it with other services and everything. I was like, okay, well, there's signs now that it's the opposite of how I originally thought about it.
Yeah. So is your posting on there now just basically you were in that habit, it's part of your routine, and so you're still posting to it today?
Yeah, I mean, it's auto posting. So yeah. I actually don't thoughtfully go through and say, what's my Google Plus strategy at this point? I'm just putting it out there just because it's pretty easy to publish. I use a little WordPress plugin that sends everything. Whenever I publish, it just goes into my Google Plus as well. But I still, the premise is sound that the strongest signal you can send to Google is to put it directly into Google.
Right.
But I think that the weight that the network carries and the weight that they put into it it's obviously either been, and I haven't done an experiment to prove that it's been diminished, but it's also one of those things where it doesn't drive traffic like it used to. I was getting, thousands of people a day coming to my site from Google Plus back in 2012, 13, when I first launched my blog and was playing around on it. Now it's almost nothing.
Wow, that's crazy. So, and yes, I did take the story on a slightly weird turn there. So I want to mention that from college through to what we're talking about now, you helped grow a company site through SEO, and then that took you through a natural transition to doing CRO. And now you spend most of your time on analytics, which we're going to get to in just a moment. We're going to talk a lot about analytics for content and SEO. One other quick little thing from a post you put on Moz in 2013, you were talking about live blogging for links and notoriety. Is live blogging something still relevant today that people could leverage?
Yeah, I think it is, especially around conferences and around areas where, you're in a concentrated area around people. So when you think about just in general, how do you get people to notice you in 2017? There's so much more out there, right? Google Panda comes out, you have to write unique content, and suddenly everybody's in the content business. And so how do you stand out when everybody is writing things? And one of the ways is there's 1,000 people locked in a room together, or not locked into a room, but in a room together at these conferences. And so if you can be the one that publishes it or puts out content, then you have an immediate concentrated network of people who are basically in the same time frame and mindset that you are. And I still believe that's true. I mean, when you can see people who get the hashtag going at conferences, who tweet out and who participate, they can form some relationships. Now, at the same time, I think when I went on stage in 2013, 2014, it would take me hours to read through all the tweets about my speech and about what I was saying on there. And now when I go on stage, and maybe this is just me, I'm not really sure, again, not scientific, but it's just a handful of things. Right. So it seems like everybody was so into tweeting when they were figuring it out and it was there, but it doesn't seem like as much participation happens there. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the conferences I go to have matured past that point. Maybe it's just that there's so much going on, but it's not the same as it was back then. So I'm not sure how live blogging would work from an immediate perspective, but I know that I got a bunch of links. I got a bunch of people following me. Just a lot of good things happened from being involved with these conferences, and also relationships. I mean, just doing the live blog, that got me, it gave me an excuse to talk to people. And I met people that I wouldn't have normally met. A lot of the time, a lot of people that I've had on my podcast, I'd say at least half of them are people that I met at a conference because we were both on the speaker bill, or because, we bumped into each other at a happy hour. So a lot of my relationships are from that connection. So whether live blogging is important or just going out of your shell and meeting people. I remember when we interviewed you talked about the same thing, right? It's just like, hey, I'm going here. Where are the dinners at? What's happening here, and how do I get involved with that? I remember you told a great story about doing that in an SMX conference. So still a lot of value in it for sure. It's just, I'm not sure if I would spend the time live blogging versus other methods of taking the digital and turning it into a physical connection.
And we'll link to that article that you wrote on Moz in the show notes, so the listeners can go check that out. I mentioned that you have a lot of experience with SEO, actually. On your site, jeffalytics.com, you wrote a post called Why I Will Not Do SEO For You. Aside from the fact that this isn't the type of service you provide now, you focus mainly on analytics, what are the other reasons at this time you were saying or trying to communicate to certain businesses that you would not do SEO for them?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite articles I've ever written. I just love that one for whatever reason, but it's just like telling people no, that it's not me, it's you, basically. And that was right when I was going back on my own again and taking on clients and just getting these requests, and just the requests that were coming in. I mean, the good ones were great, and those became clients. The ones who were sort of like unreasonable expectations about what they think that they can get from my time, it was really more of like a, read this first because you're not worth my time. And I think there is from a service provider perspective, there's this tendency for companies to think that a service is a negotiable thing, that basically you can get somebody to lower their price and you're going to get the same amount of service or the same amount of quality. But generally speaking, service providers who are in demand and who have these skills and who can deliver the work, they usually don't end up compromising their prices, right? It's not really something where you can negotiate somebody down. If they're spending time on something, effort is usually associated with the results. And actually, it's not just a one-to-one. If I put an hour into something, I'm going to get X results. It's actually an exponential thing. So the more concentrated and quality of time that a provider puts into something, the better the results are going to be. So essentially, if somebody says, hey, can you do SEO for me? That's a red flag right there, because you don't do SEO. You don't just do these things. It's not like a one time you put a coin in the machine and then out comes SEO or out comes analytics, right? These are things that are an investment. These are things that really take a maturity both from the service provider and from the client to really get the best results.
Yeah. On your post, you basically say, here's the blueprint for how I went to 0 to 10,000 organic search visitors a month on Jeffalytics. This was a few years ago. I imagine that number's grown. Your first bullet point here is, and your point here, by the way, is saying that it's not that complicated from sort of a basic theoretical level or strategic level. Your first bullet point is you say in bold letters, throw your website in the trash if it's not using WordPress as a CMS. So are you being a little hyperbolic there? I mean, so obviously a big e-commerce site's going to need to use something probably bigger than WordPress. But what's your point that you're making there? Throw the website in the trash.
That's great. I really appreciate the research you've done on this too, because it's sometimes you write stuff and you're like, I wonder if anybody will ever read this. Yeah. But basically, having done SEO as a service provider at my agency for 5 to 10 years, providing that as a service, both on retainer and everything, sometimes you couldn't even get past the fact that the companies that you're working with, their website was built in SharePoint and there was no friendly URLs and there was no consistent URLs, and they did a 302 redirect from your homepage to a default.aspx, and you couldn't even get past like the first piece of it. And so essentially, what I was saying in a more blunt way, like just hitting you over the head with it, is that if your problem, if you're hiring an SEO consultancy and they spend 12 months giving you the same recommendation that you need to get rid of your redirect of your main domain, or you need to have a friendly URL, or it needs to make sense, or you need to make it crawlable, if they can't even get past the technical phase of just basic blocking and tackling, then you'd be better off throwing your website away, crawling it as much as you can with like Screaming Frog or something, and then dumping that into a WordPress import. You would actually, instead of spending 12 months hearing the same recommendation that your website is not very good, you would just be better off actually just starting over. And if I were to start over, I would recommend WordPress.
Do you have a tool or recommendation for what you just said, how to dump the website into WordPress or import it? Because I'm not nearly as technical as you are. And I often see that question a lot in like the Moz Q&A as an associate answering questions, or just hear people ask that. So is there like a fast, efficient way to do that, what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, there is actually. I mean, it depends on how uncrawlable the website is. If it's really just ugly URLs and it still has some kind of architecture and some kind of linking scheme where it can actually be linked, you could probably just maybe Screaming Frog will get you the shell of the content, and then you can do database calls to dump it out. You can actually have your database. This is going to be very CMS specific. So, right. I've exported from like TypePad to WordPress. Like from blog to blog, it's actually pretty straightforward. There's a lot of connectors because of that. That's come up a million times. If you're like looking for your specific e-commerce system, how do you get it out? Ultimately, in any CMS, it's just data, right? So if you have the level of permissions and access, it's ultimately a query where you're taking data from one database schema, you're manipulating it into a understandable, into something a format that can be understood by the other system. So it might be like you might take a SQL command, output all the databases into another holding database, and then you wrap it around the WordPress XML that you can use to import it. So essentially, it's like you figure out how to do it with one post, and then your other posts can get out. Now the problem usually is actually the metadata, like images and other attachments that go into the post. Usually those ones are even more difficult to pull out because they the way that they store these things in the database may or may not be clear. And so that's something you need to want to work with a developer on. But I do think that it's a reasonable request to a certain extent. It's not reasonable if your company's invested, $1 million into using IBM or NetSuite or some kind of, commercial enterprise system for e-commerce. But it is reasonable if you're on the fence. And then I think in some ways it actually will get you there faster.
I love that. We went real deep into the technical pool there for a minute. I apologize to the listeners, but I don't apologize because I hope that everyone here is trying to increase their knowledge. And what Jeff just told us is definitely, at least to my ears, somewhat technically savvy and advanced. And so it does sound like you do need a developer in many cases to help, but it's good to know that these things are possible. I want to now bring things a little closer to the analytics tips, but first ask you, because you are now solely focusing on analytics, and we're going to talk towards the end of this interview about your recommendations for marketing consultants. But just real quick here, so you had many things that you can do and we're doing: SEO, PPC, CRO, analytics, even technical development stuff. So why did you decide to focus in on analytics at this point in your career and consulting and speaking and training and all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Being capable of many things is good and bad. And I'm going to tell you about why I say that, because, and this is actually something I've learned from listening to my podcast as well, interviewing people for my podcast. And basically it comes down to almost everybody that I've found that's successful has just a handful of backgrounds. It's either they're super technical and they are programmers, and then they became marketers because they were involved with the web. That's like the Darren Shaws, the Larry Kims of the world. They came from that path. And then there's like yourself. There's the musicians, the people who are more art focused in that area. That's really interesting how they get into it. And then there's really just like the classical marketer. And I'm oversimplifying this tremendously just for the sake of time. But they sort of like evolve around marketing. And the ones who are not technical, one of their biggest regrets or one of their biggest things they would do differently if they could is to become technical. Like yes. If you're technical, it opens so many doors, and people who came from a more classical marketing background or a more creative background, they're like, man, I wish I could program. But I've actually said, and I might have written this somewhere, I can't remember. I've actually said, I think it's almost bad that I can program, because it means that I'm trying to fix everything with duct tape. It's like, because I'm capable of doing something, it's like that I should be doing it. And so actually one of the evolutions I've gone through as an entrepreneur and as a person and just in general is that if you're at a big company, or if you have a team, it's all right to dabble and to be really good at many things, and you can actually fill your support network and you can actually provide several services. But if you're going to be on your own, which I mean, basically I have a small company that I'm growing. I have a team, but it's small. You actually need to focus. You need to have hyper focus in order to really get something off of the ground. Because you can spend a lot of time being not the greatest, being good at many things, but you're not at the end of the day. And I know I'm going a little bit off the rails here, but
that's welcome.
There were times
of the time.
Yeah, when I went back into entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur 3 times now. Gone and taken the dive 3 times. The third time I did it, it was just as hard as the first time, and that is because if you don't, like, you can be busy all the time. Like, you can be so busy with everything that you do, yet make no progress towards your goals at all. So I spent a solid year probably being busy every day, filling every hour of every day and then some, yet not making any progress towards my goals. And so what I decided, and this is from advice from other people and even my own thinking and my own advice, is I needed to concentrate on one thing. Otherwise, it would always be pulled in different directions. And so that's really where I said, I need to be hyper concentrated. Even though I'm capable of doing things, the best way that I can have concentrated efforts is to concentrate, is to focus on certain things. And so that's really what it comes down to, is just being capable of many things actually can be a problem if you're trying to, if you're trying to get off the ground, because you're starting many things, but you're not finishing anything.
It's super ironic that working in a big company, you would think you would be a specialist, but actually it's okay to dabble in more things, like you said. But when you're on your own, you actually should specialize and focus. And towards the end, going to give a little tease here, I'm going to ask you about making 6 figures or more as a marketing consultant. So we're going to tack that on at the end. What I'm curious about here, and then we're going to dive into the analytics tips for content marketing and SEO. Why did you choose analytics specifically to focus on? Why didn't you, I get the idea of focusing, but why not choose SEO as your focus? Did you see a need in the market, or is it a particular passion area for you? Why the focus on analytics?
Yeah, so a few things. One is the deck was stacked in my favor. So I was a Google certified partner under NDA with Google for 8 years. And so I knew the roadmap, the pipeline, the features. I was one of the first people to try almost every Google Analytics feature. And so I just had all this knowledge, like inside out, of how Google Analytics worked, that it is, it's like Google Analytics and analytics is like product focused versus SEO is like everything else. And so, I was just so far along, and I had this deep knowledge, and I actually was teaching the classes on this thing, so I was known for it. And then it's discrete, like doing a project. It's more discrete than doing an SEO project, for what I've found. Others may disagree, but meaning that I can go in there and fix somebody's analytics problems, like technical pieces, and then they can start measuring things moving forward. So I can actually make an impact that they can use moving forward. But also, if you want to, it can be an involved, ongoing project as well. And so those were considerations that went into it. And then just in general, because of that competitive advantage there and being known for it, it just seemed like the right place for me to go.
That makes sense. So now I've been building up to it. We're going to get into the actual tips and all the things you have to tell the listeners about utilizing analytics for content marketing and SEO. So I've got a bunch of different areas about analytics, like goals, bounce rate, content groups, probably 6 or 7 things. What I want to do is spend a few minutes on each, because you've talked about these in your various presentations. I want to begin with goal setting. Now, this is not life goal setting. We're talking about analytics traffic goal setting. Tell us why analytics is not really great. It's good by default, but why is it not great by default without having goals?
Yeah, so if you go to Google Analytics right now, or google.com/analytics, and you sign up, say you don't have an account, they give you 3 little icons. It says sign up for an account, put code on your site. Step 3 is just have all the insights about everything in the world. Just know everything. And I think I'm guessing all of us can probably see where that leads you, and that is you just have data. You're drowning in data, but it's only useful if you can tie that data to your outcome, like to what you want somebody to do on your website. And so collecting a bunch of data about who comes to your site, even keyword data or query data, as they call it in the Google Search Console integration, none of that stuff really matters so much if you can't tie it into the outcome you want somebody to take. And so ultimately, setting up goals in Google Analytics, it's vital, because if you don't do that, then everything you're looking at is still, it's based on like fuzzy things that may or may not matter. That doesn't really have any ties to the value you're creating for the business. And so setting up goals allows you to calculate relative value to the things that you're doing.
What is the big question that most people, even big billion-dollar companies, can't answer about their website?
It's probably, what is the purpose of your website?
Yeah, and that's what I was leading at. Very good.
Yeah. So like, what is the purpose? Why does this thing exist? Why do we have this thing here? And like, what are we hoping to do? And a lot of companies don't ask themselves that, because the website, the evolution of the web, and I know this having been in it for a while, step 1 was to take your brochure, your trifold brochure, and then you made a 6-page website, right? So a trifold brochure if anybody has ever been around for a while, you probably know that you fold it in the middle there's 3 folds of it, and it basically has 6 panels. And the one became your homepage of your site. The other one became the about us. Then there's like the services we offer, and then the contact piece. That's like basically what a brochureware website became. And then Web 2.0 is like, oh, well, we want to have a brochure website, but we want to have interactivity. We want to have blogs and stuff like that. We want to have all these things out there. But it still was never a strategic investment. Somebody said somewhere that you should have a blog, and so then a million blogs or billions of blogs were created. I think that we're 20 years into this thing, this whole web experiment, 20 plus years into it, and people still are just doing it because they think it's new, or they heard that they should do it. And very few companies, especially Fortune 500, especially multi-billion-dollar companies, very few of them really even have an idea as to what the point of their website is. Like, they might show shareholder information, they might do disclosures, but they're not trying to turn it into a business generator. So they're missing a huge opportunity still to this day.
Specific to maybe content marketing and SEO, what are some examples of goals that you recommend or often see being advantageous for these businesses to have?
Yep. So it's goals that you should not do. Let's start with that. So there's 4 types of goals you can set up in Google Analytics. One is a key page view, like an actual page was viewed like by URL. Another one is an event, which an event is essentially something that happens usually within a page that doesn't constitute a page view. And then there's the time on site or time on page, and there's the number of pages somebody viewed. Those last 2 should never really be used at all unless you're only a publisher and the only way you get paid is off of page views. The reason why those shouldn't be used is because you're basically you're saying that if somebody views a bunch of pages that it means that you're successful, but unless that fuels your economic engine, unless that makes you money, that's not the same as success. It just means that somebody viewed a bunch of pages. And so ultimately, the best goals for publishers, generally speaking, are establishing the value of your content. So for example, on my blog, for a while, when it was a hobby blog, the value is simply just getting somebody to go to it and proving that you can, that these experiments are working. Once you turn it into a business, it's how many emails do you collect? Like, how many email addresses do you collect? How many, if you're using affiliate programs, how many people click out on your affiliate links, for example? How many people, like what are these things that you want somebody to do that eventually fuel your economic engine? And so I equate goals with, I keep on saying this, fuel your economic engine. That's sort of what I've used as my definition for this whole thing, is that we all have different economics of what we're doing, but a goal should ultimately be the thing that gives you, it increments your economic engine.
So the steps for anybody listening is, if you don't have goals set up, to definitely be setting up goals around your content and your SEO. And I know the technicalities are difficult to convey on a podcast scenario, so I'm going to link to a bunch of posts that you have in the show notes at evolvingseo.com/wire. But tell us quickly why, and in terms of setting up goals, technically speaking, and then we're going to get to bounce rate. Why do you recommend a destination URL as being the best way to set up a goal?
Yeah. Yep. Because ultimately, when you have a destination URL set up, and that means that somebody viewed a key page, it unlocks other options in Google Analytics. Like, it gives you the ability to set up a funnel. So if you wanted to see the funnel, basically the steps from the beginning down to like the action being taken, you can set up Google Analytics to recognize that funnel and how things go along. So you can only do that with a destination URL. You can only do it with that one. And then just in general, additional page views are more concrete than an event. So like events, again, something that happens within a page, you could create an event for that somebody scrolls on your site. Okay, well, if they scroll, is that the same as being a positive action that happened here? Usually the positive actions are like confirmation pages, like, hey, thank you for your order. Thank you for your email address. Thank you for the interest in what you have. And so page views are just more concrete to me. Now, it doesn't mean that some people, the architecture of your website, there is no page view. So yes, there are other ways to do things, but ultimately it's more tangible to me.
So in even a lead form scenario, if you have the option, if the button when people submit their contact form takes you to a confirmation page, use the confirmation page as the destination URL in favor of the button click. It sounds like essentially what you're saying.
Yeah.
So one quick question. I'm going to leverage this interview a little bit for something I've been trying to figure out for a client. So I have a client that's basically a big publisher for all intents and purposes. He's independent, but he runs a site, lots of traffic, tons of organic traffic, but he also has a podcast. And one of his goals is to drive more people to the podcast. So should I simply create a goal around the destination URL of being the kind of the homepage of that podcast? Or what are some things I could be thinking about to set up goals for somebody that wants to drive their traffic into the podcast content of his site?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a tough one because in theory, it sounds great. Like the goal should be to go to the podcast page. But that's also not quite the action that somebody takes to become a subscriber or to download it or anything. So if you go too general on your goal, what ends up happening is especially if you make like a navigational item of your site. So as the podcast maybe is part of the navigation on the site, I'm going to assume that like there's a podcast link.
Yes.
If 10% of people just navigate to there naturally from the homepage, then you're going to have a 10% conversion rate. And it's just people who viewed that page. So you don't want views. That's the same reason why you wouldn't want number of page views to be a goal, because they can do that without actually taking the action you want them to do. So you need to get a little bit more in depth with it to be defined as a goal. Now there's a difference between a goal and a KPI or a target. So let me define those differences. A goal in the terminology of Google Analytics is essentially when somebody reaches they reach a certain page or they do the action that you want them to take. A KPI is really a key performance indicator. So it's like, hey, we got people interested in the podcast. So your KPI could be podcast interest, and the target might be how many people should go to that podcast page. So you can set a target of I want 1,000 people to go to my podcast page, but that might be that target may or may not influence the goal itself. And they're all pretty closely related to each other, but ultimately you can set a target to get thousands of people to go to the podcast page, but really your goal should be the download of the podcast or the number of people who are on there. Now, Google Analytics has limitations. One is that it's not going to be telling you how many people downloaded. I think you're using Libsyn for your podcast, and I'm using SoundCloud. Like Google Analytics you're not going to see how many people downloaded each episode necessarily, actually. So you will, the more you get into analytics, the more you're going to realize that there's going to be multiple sources of data you need to pull from in order to get the answer you're looking for. So I always recommend you actually map it out on a whiteboard, what you're trying to do, or like measure it first and then choose the tool last. Like that's the last thing you should choose is what tool we use to track it.
That makes a ton of sense, and it's a great distinction between the KPI and the goal. That was very helpful. Actually, I'm gonna let that digest and then apply that to my client situation. So, just so the listeners are aware, like I said, we're starting broad. We're talking about goals. We're going to talk about bounce rate. If anybody listening is like, well, yeah, I know what goals are. I know what bounce rate is. Don't you worry. We're going to get to some stuff. I'm telling you, these are reports that I have not really seen many people talk about or leverage that are really awesome for your SEO and content marketing. So stick with us as we continue through. But I do want to touch upon bounce rate because probably every single client at some point has asked me, is this a good bounce rate for my page? How am I doing with my bounce rate? It's 85%. Does that compare well to my... And, they look at bounce rate as this meaningful or magical number, but it's not the case. Why is bounce rate not a great number?
Yeah, bounce rate is the worst.
It's the worst.
I started out by saying that it's, I used to be more diplomatic about it, but it's the worst. It's a holdover from many, many years ago before we knew anything about anything. And so all the bounce rate is it says that somebody viewed a page and then we don't know what else happened. And so, for example, if you go to somebody's homepage and then they're interacting, they're scrolling and clicking around, they're spending 10 minutes on the homepage and they don't click on anything else, that's considered a bounced visit. Or if they don't even fully load the page, or if they don't, if they're on the page for 2 seconds and then leave, that's a bounced visit. And so it basically just, it really means we just don't know. And so I don't think that you wouldn't want to bank your entire strategy on something where you don't really know what ended up happening. And so in general, a bounce rate is something that you want to improve upon. So if you have an 80% bounce rate, yeah, you're probably better off getting it down to 75%. But also percentages I've been saying this for a long time to my students, averages are lies and percentages are an average. And so basically saying, if I have a 20% bounce rate, that's just as much contingent on the quality of your traffic as it is the quality of your website. And so basically anything that's an average is basically, it's trying to oversimplify what's really happening within your website experience. And so there's people who have 95% bounce rates and a 5% conversion rate that are making a lot of money off their website. And there's people who have much lower bounce rates and make nothing. And so it's just misleading. And the reason why people think it's important is because Google gives it precedence. They make it the most important thing that you see. When you look at the 6 metrics on anybody's report, one of them is bounce rate. And so we think it's important. I'm here to tell you that it's not actually setting up a goal and then getting the dollar index. That indicator on your content is much more valuable, I think.
It is interesting how we just accept the data and the metrics we're given on all tools by face value, right? Even if you think about Open Site Explorer, Domain Authority, Page Authority, we just use those metrics as if they're the most important things. But I think it's interesting to, at least as a mental exercise, to question the data and the metrics we're given right there in front of you from any tool. And like you've done with bounce rate, really dissected, is it important? What is the importance of bounce rate? So you talk about something called adjusted bounce rate. And again, I don't want to get into all the technicalities on the show because it's, a little visual and technical, but just tell us what adjusted bounce rate is and how can users think about getting something like that set up?
Yeah. So adjusted bounce rate is simply adding things like a scroll tracker to send an event to Google every time that somebody scrolls. And so you can adjust your bounce rate by throwing an event every time that somebody does something within a page. So if they get 25% of the way down, you can have the scroll tracker send an event, and then now your bounce rate actually reduces. So it's better than just saying that it's then being based entirely on page views.
Okay, so I want to point people to a post you did on thinksem.com, and I'll link to it in the show notes at evolvingseo.com/wire. That will tell you a little bit more about that, give you the visual, the technicalities. But now, let's move to some of the more exciting reports that I saw in a video you have that's posted on formstack.com. And I know you have this content elsewhere, but that's one place that has a lot of these things we're going to talk about. So content groupings. Tell us about content groupings. This is very exciting to me because I knew it existed, but I've just never gone in and leveraged it. So what's a content group? How do we set them up in short? And why are these so useful for SEOs and content marketers?
Yeah, for sure. So let me give you an idea of what I used to do or what a report looks like. So you go into Google Analytics and you look at your content report, and they'll tell you by default the top 10 pages that have been viewed. But anybody who's doing analysis knows that you can't really do SEO or homepage SEO and is different than article SEO or about us page, those types of things, brand versus non-brand. And so essentially you might look at those top 10 pages and you might decide, okay, well, I can't do much to influence the homepage, or I can do a little bit, but it's really going to be in the articles or the deeper product pages type stuff that I can have the most impact. So in order to measure that impact, you would want to qualify these things. You'd want to classify them by what they are. So you're not having to look and then filter out homepage and about us page, that type of stuff, brand stuff. You're not going to filter it out every time you look at it. So you could actually create a content group where it's defined as if it has the homepage or the about it, whatever that is. That can be one thing called non-brand, for example, or company corporate content. That can be one content group, and then you can do one based on your products. So your products can all be grouped together, and then you can basically see, are we moving the needle based on these groups? And the reason why this is useful is because there's either one group, which is all of your content, or there's every single page you have. And you might have 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, a million pages of content. You don't want to look at every one of those things. It's impossible to look at everything, and have analysis of it. But you don't want to look at just everything in aggregate either, because I was talking about averages before. Averages don't really tell you the story. So you need something in between looking at all your content as one entity and then 20,000 individual pieces. And content grouping is sort of right in the middle. Basically, you can set up a group to look at these things however you want to look at them.
Some other quick examples. I'm going to dive into a few of these, but you can set groups by word count, author, the year of the content. These are all awesome. So I always assumed or just thought that you would do this with segments, or maybe in the past before content groupings came out. But actually, content grouping seems like an easier way to accomplish this. So just real quick again, do you find the setting in under the admin section of your analytics account?
Yeah, so you set this up as an administrator, and basically you can do it as simple as you can just say if the URL contains this keyword in it, then make it part of this group, or you can make it more complex using code to define. So each page gets a little piece of code that defines how it gets put in there.
I love that. So you mentioned a few ways to use this in your presentation, and I'll mention them here. So you could set up reports or groupings rather, that show branded versus non-branded organic search traffic. I love that one. I think all SEOs listening will love that one. You mentioned one that's very close to my heart, and that is how many comments a piece of content receives. So are you saying that you could analyze your content's performance by how many comments it's received?
Yeah, absolutely. So say that you have a theory that Google overweights, or they prefer content that gets a lot of comments. Like there's some rumor out there that there's a ranking signal around comments correlated to Google. You could actually look at how many people land on your site through organic search, and then you can segment by how many comments those pages get. Absolutely. And so the number of comments in WordPress, which is, as we talked about, is my recommended CMS for everybody, it's as simple as just for this page, how many comments are there? And so you can put that in there, and you can actually get that into your Google Analytics pretty easily. And to answer your question about the difference between content groups and segmentation, there's no reason why you shouldn't do segmentation still. I mean, segmentation is awesome, but really segmentation is like an ad hoc on-demand tool that you're using on a whim, and it's usually using to sort of drill down, versus content grouping is a more permanent existence. So it's a more permanent fixture in what you're doing. So if you want to have a more permanent view on these things, like you just want it to be there, since you are manipulating the data that gets pushed into Google Analytics by putting code on your site or doing the search functionality for a keyword, you're basically getting yourself a permanent report. And there are issues with sampling in Google Analytics. SEOs, this is often the bane of their existence, that if you look at enough data, like over time, Google's going to limit what you can see, and they're going to use something called sampling, and your reports are not going to be accurate, or they're going to be inferred. And usually we want to work with absolutes with our SEO data versus inferences.
As some of the listeners might know, I'm going to be a little more bullish on the comments as a ranking factor thing. So Google has now, two people from Google have mentioned commenting is a sign of community, which is a sign of the content quality algorithm. I believe Gary, however you say his last name, I don't know. And I think John Mueller have both said this. And I talked about commenting. I have a post on Moz about my opinion on blog comments. It got a lot of negative criticism at the time, but I want to emphasize again that I'm super excited about this, because now we can track content at the comment level. That's awesome. And then you also mentioned, then we're going to move on to custom channels. But when you set up these content groupings, is it correct that you can now set up custom reports that you can look at a variety of these things all kind of next to each other? Yeah,
absolutely. So if you set up your content groupings, you set up your reporting, since it is a permanent fixture in your data now, since it is in the reports, you can build out multiple reports that correlate these things. So I had mentioned landing page is a dimension, and that's based off of SEO, which is another, so source medium of organic from Google. And then the next thing is your landing page, and then you can see the content group essentially that it belongs to. And so you can create custom dimensions off of these things. You can create custom metrics. You can do all kinds of different ways of aggregating these reports. And so that is another, and this is getting geeky about the data structure of Google Analytics, but essentially we are limited by the number of dimensions we can look at in one place within a standard report. But if you can get these things into a custom report, you can look at 3 or 4 or 5 different things side by side and start to get down in that granular level that you can actually take action on.
Yeah, I think the example in your video is you say putting source, the content source, and then the year, and then the post categories. So this is getting very specific. Now you can see where the best content from the source in the year it was posted by content category. I love that.
Yep.
One last thing I have to mention is you say that it's possible to pull the keyword target that you set in your Yoast plugin into these content groupings. Mm-hmm. That is awesome. So again, this is visual and technical. We won't get into that in the post, but if users are curious about that, is there like a resource, is there a tutorial for how to do that, or like?
Yeah. So I actually wrote a post on Moz about this, where it's quite like a tutorial where I show you the exact setup, and then the WordPress connection. I actually, on GitHub, I put out there the code that I use to put that out there. And so I can get you a link to that too. The Yoast one in particular, I would have to, I'm not sure that I have a code example, but it's pretty straightforward to figure it out, because essentially it's just data. And actually from an SEO perspective, there's just so much data that's out there. Anytime you can give it metadata or something that can qualify it or classify it, some kind of like entity relationship to what it actually is, that's not just an analytics thing that's valuable for, just in general, knowing what these things are about, and metadata can be really helpful. So it has repercussions everywhere, really. And the cool thing about WordPress is that Yoast, you have actually been classifying things by keyword and category forever if you've been using a blog software. And so there are some taxonomies that you can just borrow from right out of your database and then put it into your other systems.
When you set these up, the content groupings, do they work retroactively or only from the point forward that you've set them?
Yeah. So from a content perspective on a content group, basically the classification it gets put into is done whenever that URL is loaded. And so if you're putting it into a content group, even if you wrote it 10 years ago, once that page gets loaded again, it gets assigned into a content group. And so it is retroactive to that extent. So yeah, for all intents and purposes, it is retroactive, but it might take a little bit of time to sync up.
So you need a page view, and then it triggers.
Exactly. Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
So we're going to bounce through a couple more, no pun intended, bounce through a few more, and then we're going to get to being a 6-figure marketing consultant and a couple other quick things at the end. But custom channels, custom dimensions, segmentation, and benchmarks are the 4 that I want to touch upon. Custom channels, what are they and why are they important for somebody doing SEO or content marketing?
Yep. Again, so just like content groupings, channel groupings are pretty similar. And that is that you can either look at all your traffic as like, I got 10,000 people to my website last month, or you can look at it as in like, you can look at very granular, like Google organic search or Twitter T.co links. You can see the granular areas. A content or a channel group is essentially Google's abstraction. It's a default abstraction to say, there's really these 8 things that are important to your website: direct, referrals, organic search, paid search, social, email, and display advertising. And there might be another one in there, but those are the ones that are there. But these are in many ways self-serving. They're basically saying, here's, in the world of Google, here's how traffic comes to your site. And they're very granular with Google related things, like making it seem really important, but they sort of shutter other things that are not Google related. And so the defaults, you can make improvements to them to be more around the way that you want to look at them.
What would be a couple quick examples for somebody doing content marketing? Would you set up like a channel for paid advertising, for example, or would you get more specific, or what's a couple quick examples?
Yeah. So within paid media, you might want to get, like, you could just do all paid, but then maybe you'd want paid search versus paid social, or organic social versus paid social. Mm-hmm. House email list versus somebody else's email. Referrals from our link building efforts versus referrals from earning links, or referrals from people that we know, self referrals or referrals from sites that we own versus sites that other people own, branded organic search versus non-branded organic search. Those are all things that you can start to break and differentiate on.
An example for this show, so I've been trying to post most episodes when relevant. I'm not being spammy, but of this podcast, I'm posting it on inbound.org, growthhackers.com, and Product Hunt. Could I just make a little custom channel that says podcast community postings or something, whatever I call it, and then essentially put those 3 sites in there? Is that like a good use case for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what I would do.
I think I'm going to do that. So custom dimensions, I love this as well. A couple examples you gave were word range and screen size. So how do we set up custom dimensions, and what are the use cases of that?
Yep. So a dimension, the way I like to simplify it is that a dimension is a column of data in your analytics report, and then a metric are the rows, like columns versus rows. In almost every report that I look at, I'm looking at a secondary dimension. So I don't look at search traffic without looking at landing page, for example, or you look at this, but you slice it with that. So it's like slicing and dicing your data. Now there's hundreds of dimensions. I don't know the exact number, 80 to 100 dimensions that you just get out of Google Analytics by putting that simple code on your website. You can get 20 more dimensions that are in your own language, your own taxonomy, by adding them in there. So basically putting code on your website to say it belongs in this dimension. So you get 20 slots of custom things you can look at to slice and dice. And so, for example, like you said, I gave an example of one where Google organic search by the number of words. And so the word count is the secondary dimension. And I can say, okay, well, I get this much traffic based on how many words I put into the post.
So content marketers might want to know if there's a correlation to search traffic and word length. What about, could you look at something like word length and match that to some kind of goal or outcome as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You can, yep, yeah, that exact thing would do that. So you can see search traffic by word length, by by your conversion rate, or essentially when you're looking at content, it doesn't tell you your conversion rate for the content. It tells you your dollar index.
Right.
So how much value from your goals gets trickled down into that piece of content. It's like a proxy. It's not perfect, but it gives you, it's pretty good.
I love that. And another one, and I'm just kind of brainstorming off the top of my head. Could you look at this in relation to the affinities and demographics as well? Like maybe as a content marketer, you're trying to get a sense of, okay, we see that photography lovers consume a lot of content on this site, but do they like the longer content? Like, would you recommend going that specific with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing about these are that you get 20 of them and you can experiment. So I did, for example, I did it at first with the exact number of words, and then I realized that was too segmented. So then I broke it down into within 200 characters. So you might want to do something along those lines. Now, yeah, and so I do think that it depends on what your outcome is from this. If it's purely SEO and you want to give guidelines to your writers about how long they should write it for, then yeah, then that's legit things that people talk about in SEO. Like I need articles that are between this many words and this many words. Those are real instructions you send out, so you should measure that in analytics.
Yes. Other
things are more experimental, right? It's more like, oh, I'm just doing this experiment because I have a hunch or I'm curious about this thing myself. And so then those ones, it's not production, it's more theory or more testing the waters.
I was thinking of if we're running Facebook ads and we're targeting photographers, just the example I chose off the top of my head, maybe that gives an indication of do they like longer content or shorter content by word count, and then that might influence the Facebook ads that we create or the dark posts that we use and target photographers. So we talked about segmentation already. That was on my list. I want to jump to the last one before we get to, I want to talk about your podcast for a moment and then being a marketing consultant making 6 figures. Benchmarks. You showed an example of this. I didn't even know this was possible. This looks pretty incredible. What's a benchmark in analytics?
Yeah, so when you sign up for Google Analytics, behind the scenes, you're basically opting in to share your data anonymously with other Google Analytics users, and they infer the category you belong to. They have a pretty good idea as to what type of website you have. Basically, you could look at real estate agents in the state of Minnesota, and you can see how you compare to them from a traffic standpoint. So benchmarking essentially, it only gives you 3 categories of reports. It's traffic sources, it's mobile, desktop, tablet traffic, and then it's I think, actually at the top of my head, I can't remember. I think it's geography for where they are or whatever. But basically you can see, are you getting as much traffic or less traffic by channel than other people? And so what I use this for is I can see, if you're not spending any money on advertising and your competitors are spending $10,000 or $100,000 a month, you can make a case to your employer or whoever, your client, hey, we need to up this. Or if you think SEO is doing well because you're at 10,000 a month or some number, but everybody else is at 100,000, then it's like, okay, well, we're doing well, but we have so much further to go to be at the level with these other people. And so basically it gives you, and it's all anonymous data. You can't do a named competitor. You don't really know how your competitor is doing, but you can tell if you're ahead or behind in the category. And then you can use that to inform your investments.
The screenshot that really drew my attention is the ability to overlay on the graph visually your metrics versus the benchmarks. And I could see a lot of really great uses for that. That's just really kind of got me excited to go check that out and get that set up. So that's awesome. That's so much analytics stuff we touched upon. I hope the listeners took away at least a few reports that they can apply to their SEO and content marketing. Great stuff. Again, we'll link to all of it in the show notes. Now I want to move a little bit to being a marketing consultant. You wrote a post about how to make 6 figures being a marketing consultant. So first of all, what are the key pillars that you've talked about to being a marketing consultant that can make 6 figures? I know we touched upon this a little bit before, but what are some of those characteristics of being able to do 6 figures?
Yeah, so this is a question that I get a lot, and I teach at a university, and a lot of people are like, hey, this is my goal, is to get out of this, get this digital marketing certificate from your program and to go out there and make a bunch of money as a consultant. And it's not just about money. Let's just be clear about this. It's weird. I don't even like putting 6 figures into a title, but these are real questions from people. But basically, if you want to get beyond a certain level, if you want to get to the point where you're hitting a goal, 6 figures is a pretty nice goal for people to have. I think that's an easy, number for people to visualize, especially in the U.S. market. Basically, you're not going to be able to there's only so many hours in the day, so you have to either have a certain high hourly rate, basically have a high hourly rate because you have a bunch of expertise. Like, for example, if you're a super expert in SEO, or if you're super expert in analytics or something, you can charge quite a bit of money. I noticed on your site, there's like a call me and it costs this much, right? If you get enough of those calls, you can make 6 figures and still have some time left over. And the reason why you can do that is because you have the expertise. And so the best way to make a bunch of money here is to have enough expertise where people can pay you a premium, where the math just adds up. And so essentially, if you charge $250 an hour to somebody, then you only need 400 hours. Yes, 400 hours in order to make 6 figures. So basically, how do I find somebody who's willing to give me 400 hours worth of work over the next year? And so it is somewhat of a math problem. But even beyond that, it's part confidence, it's part business development skills. You need to, it's easy to say, I want to charge $250 an hour. We can all say that. Having the confidence to actually get by with that or to put that into writing is another story. It takes years for people to get to that point. But essentially, how does that math problem work for you? And then how do you get people who are asking you to work with you? How do you get people who are lined up, who are ready for your expertise? And so a lot of it comes down to specialty and then promotion. Like you having a podcast is a way to get your name out there and to get going. There's all kinds of different ways that you can get people to inquire about what you can do. And essentially, that's sort of the article that I wrote, and the course that I have coming out, the Agency Jumpstart course, really talks about, for people's specific scenarios, how do you get to the point where you can confidently pursue this angle that you're looking to get to, that you want to get to your mark, which is 6 figures for many people.
As we mentioned earlier, you went from doing a lot of different things. You have a lot of different skills, kind of niching down into analytics. Was that painful for you when you tried to make that transition? Was it tough getting people to realize and adjust to the fact that you were only doing analytics, or was it tough to, go from whatever work you had before that to getting enough just analytics clients and work to be full-time? Or how was that for you?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate that I've done this 3 times now, and I've done this for a decade plus. And so at first it was hard. I thought that if I went more niche down, that I'd lose my expertise, I'd lose my edge, I wouldn't be great at everything. But then, my business partners at my agency helped me realize that you shouldn't be going for 100% close rate. You shouldn't be saying yes 100% of the time. Really, it should be more like 30%. That was our target. So if we go to a pitch, I'd want to win 30% of the time, not 100%. Because if you get 30%, then you can weed out the ones who aren't willing to pay you what you're worth. I will not do SEO for you crowd that we talked about earlier. You can weed them out so that you're not getting the wrong people coming in. You can also, it's not just weeding them out, but it's also knowing that you're busy and knowing how much time it takes to do something. You can whittle down to the point where you're getting the rates that you want. And so if you can find the right client and you can get the rates you want, and you can basically say, I'm only going to take on fewer things, but I'm going to make the same amount of money. And so fortunately, I've been doing this for long enough, and I've gotten to the maturity that I'm like, oh, if I don't win this deal, it's actually the best thing that can happen, because then I can get the real deal that I want to get. And it takes a lot of cycles and a lot of perseverance to realize that, right? It's valuing what you bring to the table and valuing your time and valuing your personal freedom and the things that you like to do, your hobbies, your family. It's valuing those things more than this perceived winning a client. I actually, when I pass on something, and I have the luxury of passing on people now, which is amazing, that I can just say, no, you're not right for me. Usually, that took years to get to that point. It feels good now. It's a relief, as opposed to in the past, I'd be like, man, what's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough to do these things? And so it's taken a big attitude shift for me to really get to that point. But it's also, I can do the 400 hours and make a nice living. And then I have, assuming that you work 40 hours a week, you have 2,000 hours in a year. I can do all kinds of other stuff during that additional time. And so you can either work more during that time after getting this command. You can work on your pet projects. I'm building up my products, my courses, my online courses. That's become a really awesome project for me. I teach at a university. I basically set it up so that in about 400 to 500 hours a year of consulting, I can do the rest, everything else I want to do. And that's sort of like icing on the cake, basically.
We've talked about this mainly in context of a consultant. However, you've probably seen these too, maybe businesses out there, and I'm sure the listeners have seen this, businesses that look like they do everything, right? You get the web design agency that does SEO, and they do PPC, and oftentimes it's terrible. And we unfortunately are picking up pieces from that as specialists. Yeah. But what's your opinion on where's the threshold of where businesses should consider focusing their services, their products, their offerings as well in the marketing context? How do you feel about businesses that do web design, but they also do SEO and they also do social media and that whole thing?
Well, my sort of cynical thought is, who goes to your website and says, oh, I'm so glad they can do all these things? Nobody, right? And also every agency website's really bad. Even my own, I think it's a little bit better than it gets, I still hate, nobody likes their agency website because it's the last thing you do. It's like the shoemaker's children. And ultimately nobody goes to an agency website and says, I wonder what they can do, and then reads about all the services and then is like, oh, I'm going to call them and ask them for this service. It actually is, it's not nearly that. Like that you're giving them too many options. And basically, usually what ends up happening is they're like, oh, I just need help with something. They find an agency's website, and then the agency needs to consult with them as to what they actually need and build a quote and to put things together. And so I think that overwhelming with choices is not really making anybody better. And it's not just like getting people lined up, ready to work with you. So ultimately, what you really want to do is you want to get people into your inquire about what you can do, and then you build a solution for them. That's one of the most valuable things you can do as a service provider. Now, if you're in the position where you're building a solution for somebody and you're giving them pricing and you're building it out, then it all comes down to whether you have the skills to perform that solution, or you plus a partner network have the skills, or if you're like, you know what, actually you probably would be better off with somebody who has a specialty here. And so that is a tough part of specializing, right? Is that if you're super specialized in an area, it can be great for your margins and for what you can charge, but it all limits the number of clients you can work with, or makes it, you don't have the same level. Like, you can't produce the same scenario for every single client, because you only do this certain thing. So you have like the generalist can do a lot of different things and not well, and then the specialist, they're relying on other people to do the job, and they might not do it as well as you expect them to do it. It's an interesting dilemma and conundrum, and it's funny. I've been meaning to talk about more how, I'm 37, but really in not entrepreneur, but in SEO years, I'm 27, right? Because I started really my SEO career when I was 30 or 31, compared to a lot of people such as yourself that, you built websites in 8th grade and went to college for computers, and, kind of right out of the gate, we're doing that. So it's funny because I feel like I'm now 7 years or so officially into this, feeling that sort of that dilemma and that pain as well of the temptation to want to niche down a little bit, but also the fear of making that leap because of, the natural fear of, are there going to be enough people for this one particular small thing that I'm going to do? Yeah. And even within just saying that we offer SEO as a small 4-person company, even that feels a little too big sometimes as a service offering. Yeah. And so it's something that I feel this kind of a turning point coming, but and maybe just afraid to take that leap. You were going to say something? Yeah. So I think that here's what I tell my students in my class, and that is in the agency class, and that is, I chained my way into 2 things in 2005-ish. Google Analytics and WordPress. I'd been around for a while. I'd made websites. I've made my own CMSs. I've actually made my own web analytics tools. I did that. And then these things came around and was like, this is all that I need. These things fix all the problems that I ever had. These things do what I need them to do. This is it for me. And so I basically, those 2 platforms were like, this is, every website I do, it's going to be in WordPress. That's it. And every website I measure, it's going to be in Google Analytics. That's it. And those turned out to be amazing decisions. Yes. Now, I think that, and they lasted for a decade, which is crazy, right? I think they're going to be around for a while longer. Like, they're going to be around probably for 5 to 10 more years. These things should be around. But I wouldn't necessarily start out in 2017 chaining myself to those 2 platforms, because they're at a maturity level, right? And so I think that one of the things that I would recommend any consultant that they do is if you're going to bet on the next 10 years, you shouldn't bet on a mature market. You should bet in an evolving market. And so, and SEO is a mature market, just so that everybody knows it's in the maturing area. So if I were to get into this today, it's probably not something I'd recommend to somebody to start right now, because it's been around for 10 years. Yeah. Just to give the listeners context, so Jeff and I just started our call again on Skype. Skype failed us, is one of the biggest battles, I think, with podcasters. And in fact, a client of mine, and you use a tool called Zencastr, which I thought was really cool, that I recommended to somebody just random on Twitter the other day. But a client of mine is actually building a tool that sounds even a little bit better. And Jeff, privately, I'll send it to you via email. He's in beta with it right now, but you might be interested in checking it out. It does something similar to Zencastr, but I guess it's a little bit even better. I got to get the full story behind it. But anyways, I want to jump back into what you were saying. So you were recommending, if somebody were to try to niche down now in 2017, SEO is a mature market. So, and you were giving some thoughts on what you might consider now in 17. So let's pick up there. Yeah. So I'm one of those guys who, for the last 10 years of my life, has looked at like an e-marketer projection of where the money's going to be spent. I've used that to place a lot of bets, where media is going, where search is growing, online passing TV I remember I actually have, and I saved a lot of these screenshots. One of them was like, online's going to pass cable TV for the first time. And I was so excited about that. And it was like this year, I think it's online is passing all TV for the first time. And so everything is going crazy. Right. And then you see some of those drill downs and it's like, yeah, online's still growing really fast. But then if you drill down even further, online digital desktop is not growing at all. It actually hasn't grown for a while. The only growth that's happening is in mobile. Yes. And so then when you look at that, you actually say, is mobile a channel or is mobile an alternate reality? And is mobile a part of digital or is it eating digital? And actually, I would say it's probably going to be in the latter one. It's that it's soon it will be classified in its own, and then you're going to look at the digital spend. You're going to be like, wow, digital actually fell off a long time ago. When I say from a traditional desktop perspective. And then, okay, well, knowing that, what would you put your bet on? Something that's even, where, in an even market, like a market that has no growth, basically you're stealing a piece of pie from somebody else, right? The pie doesn't get any bigger. You're stealing from it, or the pie actually is going to get smaller over time as things shift. And so do you want to first enter into something where you're fighting over a piece of pie, or do you want to go into something where the pie is getting seemingly bigger into the future and infinitely, right? Or at least infinitely in digital terms, mind you, is like 5 years. We don't know what's going to happen beyond 5 years, but you can have a really good 5 years if you chain yourself to the right wagon, essentially. And I don't even know if that term really makes a lot of sense or not, but I've been using it. But that's sort of like hitching to a wagon or something like that. Anyway, so why wouldn't you go into mobile? And then also, like, what are the applications of mobile? What are the challenges people are going to have? What does it even mean? And I think that's the part that we have to define. If it were easily defined, people would be there now. But is it a smaller version of of the last 10 years of our lives, or the last 15 years of the internet, or is it going to create its own new thing? I think we're at the decision point where it has just been a smaller version of the last way of doing things, but eventually, and in many ways, like apps and other monetization methods, new ways of working have come out of it as well. But essentially, that's where you'd want to place your bet now if you were to be a consultant, or if you were to go into something as an emerging area, because during that growth, you don't even have to be necessarily the best at what you do. Actually, you can just consume some of the growth. Like, if we know that right now there's $10 million, this is not an actual number, there's $10 million in mobile in 2017, there's going to be 15 in 2018, there's going to be 20 in 2019, there's going to be 30 in 2020. It's going to grow that fast. Just by being there, you can drink from that fire hose. And so that's sort of where I recommend people niching down as a decision that you should make, but it should be around where things are going to be. There's a phrase, I'm from the Midwest, from Minnesota, skate to the puck, right? Skate to where the puck's going to be.
Wayne Gretzky.
Not where it is. Yeah, Wayne Gretzky, right? So be like Wayne Gretzky. Don't be like, I'm trying to think of a good hockey example, but I don't really have one. So.
And I used to play hockey, so I should have an example, but I don't have one either. You were trying to think of like a bad player, like somebody that doesn't do that. Yeah,
I actually have a player in mind, but he passed away, so I don't want to. Yeah, so
that would be a bad time.
I actually have an exact player in mind, but I just didn't want to. It's Derek Bugard, who played for the Wild. He's like a big goon. But yeah, that's the guy I had in mind. But then I shouldn't say that, but I just did. So we can edit that out if you want.
It's no problem. You've given me a great segue opportunity into podcasting. But before I talk about podcasting, we're a little bit over the hour mark here, and as I've said on a few of the past shows, listeners have been liking that, but my past guest, Carrie Jones, who's also a listener, said that she likes the longer shows because she'll listen to them while exercising. So for anybody out there on the treadmill or running on the road or lifting weights, if you're exercising out there, keep going. I just want to give a little encouragement. That would be like a funny tie-in, right, to like make this show like semi-motivational, right? Like we hit the hour and 15 mark, and I encourage all my exercising listeners to continue in their exercising.
You can do it. You can do it. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff, giving the listeners some encouragement. So I mentioned the tie into podcasting as a segue. What I started to look at is if you go to Google Trends and you type in podcasting and you look at that as a search term or as an industry categorization in Google Trends, you'll see that it's actually been growing very heavily, very quickly in the last few years. Some people call this the Serial effect, right? With that show Serial that came out and then that really kind of made podcasting blow up again. It's actually higher than the original numbers it was like in 2005 or 6 when podcasting first came out. And so podcasting is interesting because even if you don't really grow your audience per se on your own, like you said, you're just latching onto the fact that more and more people are listening to podcasts. And I think that's one thing that I've seen as well, almost without as much effort or push. I'm just going with the momentum of more people listening to podcasts. And we've been getting some great growth numbers here. But I want to ask you about your podcast. Why did you decide to focus on talking about the story and career angle of marketers as opposed to talking about marketing tips and tactics like I do here on this show?
Yeah. So I love WTF with Mark Maron. That's one of my favorite podcasts because he deconstructs people who are, I like to hear the story because to me, it's the journey, not the end, right? It's cool that somebody's a big movie star or a comedian or, they're in front of people, but it's like, how did they get there? And actually the reason why I decided is because I've taught physically in person about 1,000 people digital marketing and analytics, and they're from all kinds of walks of life, all kinds of different backgrounds, a lot of career changers, a lot of people who are at a job where they feel like they need something new to try something new in order to get out and to reach new grounds. There's all kinds of different scenarios of people, but they all want to know, like, what's the path for me? How do I figure out what this path is? And so I told them my story. I was like, okay, well, I did this, and a lot of the stuff that we talked about at the beginning, I did this, and that. Here's the moves I made, and here's what I learned along the way. But that's just one example. And there's actually very few people who can use my path as any kind of way to as an example for their career. And so I don't think that it's like you can't make one person's path. What you need to do is you need to compile several of them, take the best parts for you that make the most sense for you, even if it's just one little breakthrough that you get per episode or per couple episodes. Then you basically have a blueprint for where you think you can be successful. And so I wanted to compile people that I respected, people who have achieved things in the marketing world, and just really understand how they got there, like what moves do they make, what decisions do they make. And so that's where I arrived at the topic. And it's been honestly like if people listen to it, I get people tell me that they enjoy it and everything, but I enjoy it too because I'm still even though I've found success in many ways, I'm still evolving my career. I'm still working on this, going forward. And so I get several ideas every time I talk to somebody, and I get inspired. And so that's really, it's really about that.
I can definitely echo the same experience doing a podcast as well on my end. And I'm going to encourage the listeners of my show to go check out your show, the Jumpstart Podcast. You have guests like Rand Fishkin, Talia Wolf, Alita Solis, who's going to be on my show in a few weeks. And so definitely check that out to hear the stories of many SEOs and digital marketers that you might be familiar with, or get to know new people that you might not be familiar with. So I want to talk just quickly at the end here about your agency Jumpstart course. What is this course? What's the structure of it? How long is it? How many sessions? Give us a quick synopsis about that course.
Yeah, so one of the things that a lot of my students want to do with their newly minted digital marketing skills is they want to consult. They want to use it as a way to offer these skills to other people and to make money as a consultant. And so I had enough people ask me for it who took my other classes that I was like, I can write I can give you a blueprint for exactly how you can become a consultant and how you can start basically providing services to people and use it as an economic vehicle for you. And so I created this thing called the Agency Jumpstart course. It's 40 lessons. Actually, it's 44 videos, and it talks you through everything you could ever need to know about starting and then growing an agency. Go from everything from like, when do you know that you can jump out and start? How do you choose which niche you're going to go after? When should you hire an employee, or can you hire an employee? What considerations if you bring on a business partner? What percentage should each person get? How do you plan for an exit of your agency? Like, what can your agency sell for when you're done with it? How do you get out of it? And then what mistakes might you make along the way? So I sort of share my journey, having done this for quite some time, and then also give a lot of, basically about 15 to 20 different downloadable spreadsheets and templates you can use to put in your own numbers, live coaching calls to like walk people through, answer their questions for them and to grow it. And so it's been a really rewarding project. And so we did a beta just in November, and we just wrapped that up. And then we're gonna put it out there for the public to consume in March. And so I'm really looking forward to getting a new cohort of people that really want to focus on growing their business and growing it in a way that gives you more freedom to do the things that you enjoy. So instead of, working on your business, and that's all you do is work on something, how do you work a lot more smart? Or how do you be smart about the way that you build a business? How do you be thoughtful about building a business that really helps you reach your long-term financial and lifestyle goals?
It sounds super practical. You see a lot of these courses out there that are people that have never run an agency or set up their own business, yet they're making money off of teaching you how to make money, or they're making a business off of teaching you how to make a business. And this is not the case this is like the real deal, it sounds like, because you have a lot of real actual experience, and you're talking about things that are super relevant and specific and actionable, it sounds like, for agency owners. So I love that. What's the URL people can go to check that out?
Yeah, it's agencycourse.com. So it's pretty straightforward, just agencycourse.com. And like you said, the practical piece of it, my agency paid a consultant $6,000 a day in order to go into his office and to have him talk us through the things that I talk about in this course, essentially. Wow. And it would just barely scratch the surface. And so really, there's so many. You can never have too much knowledge about running a business and about growing things. And so I'm looking for people who are either about to take the leap and they just need a guide to make sure they don't do the wrong things, or people who have already taken the leap who just want to know what's next for them. That's really the people that I'm focusing on. And so I appreciate you giving me a little bit of time to talk about it as well.
Absolutely. I'm just curious, as a marketer myself, how have you promoted the course? Is it just through your existing channels and audience, or have you been doing things to try to reach a new audience with the course?
Yeah. So as a marketer and as a lifelong learner, I've done a few things. So I've done anything from like putting my courses on a Daily Deal website to get names and then emailing them about this other course. I started a little online quiz to see whether you should freelance or not. So I'm going to release that in early March. Mm-hmm. It's going to be really fun. It's going to be about whether you should work at an agency or be an in-house marketer. We'll see how that goes. Podcasts, webinars, basically just getting the promotion out there. I bought several online courses myself about how to sell and launch products. You never can stop learning. And so I've been just like a sponge, consuming as much as I can to get the maximum impact on how this thing, on how it goes forward. And then also, working with people like yourself and others to give them let them see the product and give feedback and have some investment in it as well. So then they can tell others as well. So it's trying to go at it with all angles, but then also making it manageable, because I don't want to have too many students where it's like this big course that nobody gets a chance to get to know each other. So it's getting everybody that I can to know about it, but then also making it so the classes are intimate and you have a one-on-one experience.
And you're illustrating something all marketers should be doing, which is having something that you're working on and trying to market to, like you said, to learn, to have your own sort of playground to experiment in and not have to worry about the client situation or the client's results.
Yeah.
And so I've experienced that with this podcast, for example, and it's great for all marketers to be doing something like that. So Jeff, we're going to wrap things up in just a second. It's been a great interview. We've covered so much stuff. Again, for anybody out there on the treadmill, you've got a couple minutes left, so don't give up. And I just want to ask you one quick fun thing. You mentioned somewhere that you have an annual barbecue called Porkapalooza, and it draws 40 to 60 of your friends. This reminds me of, I had Saul Orwell on my show, and he has an annual cookie event in Toronto. This sounds a little similar to that, but what is this pork event, Porkapalooza, that you have?
Yeah, so it's funny that when I wrote that one, it was 40 to 60. I think that it peaked when I did about 103 pounds of pork and had about 120 people at the house, so like a pound per person. And my house is not meant to have 120 people there. There was cars all the way down the street. But basically, I really like barbecuing, and so I would smoke pork shoulders. I did like 4 pork shoulders, and then we make our own sausages. We made the bacon explosion, which is like you wrap bacon and you weave it into a lattice, like a fabric, and then you put sausage and more bacon in there, and then roll it up and smoke it. And then ribs and all kinds of stuff. So I basically I just tried to do, as much as I could as an homage or just basically trying to do this barbecue. And then every year I added something to the equation, and it got probably a little bit out of control. And then once I moved away from Minnesota, it sort of fizzled out. So I haven't done one in about a year now. But I do hope that once I settle down from this digital nomad thing, that I'll be able to revive Porkapalooza.
Sounds incredible. And I'm not a vegetarian, but I apologize to any vegetarians out there hearing all about this.
Or religious. Yeah, sorry.
Pork and everything like that. But there is an option for you. You can go to Saul Orwell's episode and hear about cookie life in his event. And that might be a more vegetarian-friendly option for a food event of guests that I've had on the show. But anyways, Jeff, let's wrap it up. Treadmill, people, you can start to wind down. I think I'm going to do that in every episode. No, I'm just kidding. But Jeff, it's been a great show. It was so much fun having you on my podcast after getting to be a guest on yours. So just tell people quickly the various URLs, the Twitter profiles, and all that stuff where people can see you online.
Yeah, Dan, thanks so much for having me. First of all, this has been really awesome. You've done your homework, done your research, and I think that everybody's going to hopefully get some actionable things they can take out of this. So I really appreciate it. My website is jeffalytics.com, and that's the main sort of hub where you can get articles and links to my courses. I have 3 online courses now that I'm really proud of. That one teaches AdWords, one teaches analytics, and the other one's coming up to teach the agency side of the business. And then I like to blog, and you can see my podcast on there and everything. And so that's the main hub. Jeffalytics is my Twitter account as well, and would love to connect with people and hear more of your stories and connect and share.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff. And we'll see everyone next time on Experts on the Wire.